Question 1. When auditing an organization's adherence to ISO 27001-2013, what is the foundational procedural step an auditor must verify to ensure the organization is adequately addressing its legal and regulatory information security obligations? Option A. Assessment of the organization's contractual agreements with third-party service providers concerning data processing and security clauses. Option B. Verification of the organization's successful implementation of a data breach notification system compliant with GDPR Article 33. Option C. Review of the organization's internal policies for disciplinary actions against employees found to be in violation of information security laws. Option D. Confirmation that a documented process exists for identifying and maintaining an inventory of all applicable legal and regulatory obligations relevant to information security. Correct answer is D. Confirmation that a documented process exists for identifying and maintaining an inventory of all applicable legal and regulatory obligations relevant to information security. Explanation. The core of ISO 27001-2013, particularly in relation to legal and regulatory requirements, lies in Clause 6. 1. 3. Information Security Risk Treatment, and Annex A. 5. Asset Management. Specifically, Annex A. 5. 1. 1. Inventory of assets mandates the identification and classification of all information assets. This identification is a prerequisite for understanding which assets are subject to specific legal and regulatory obligations. Clause 6. 1. 3 requires that identified risks, including those arising from non-compliance with legal and regulatory requirements, are treated. The process of identifying applicable legal and regulatory requirements is a fundamental step in risk assessment, as outlined in Clause 6. 1. 2. Information Security Risk Assessment. Therefore, the initial and most critical step for an auditor to verify compliance with legal and regulatory requirements under ISO 27001-2013 is to confirm that the organization has a documented process for identifying and maintaining an inventory of all applicable legal and regulatory obligations relevant to its information security. This foundational step ensures that the subsequent risk assessment and treatment activities are informed by the correct legal context. Without a comprehensive and up-to-date inventory of these requirements, the organization cannot effectively assess or manage risks associated with them, nor can an auditor verify that such management is in place. Question 2. An auditor is reviewing the business continuity and disaster recovery plans for a multinational logistics firm that handles time-sensitive cargo. The Business Impact Analysis, BIA, has identified the primary booking and tracking system as a critical business function, with a recovery time objective RTO of 4 hours and a recovery point objective RPO of 1 hour. The proposed disaster recovery strategy involves restoring from nightly backups at a secondary data center. What fundamental aspect of the disaster recovery strategy is most likely misaligned with the established BIA requirements? Option A. The disaster recovery plan does not include provisions for failover to a tertiary site in case of a dual site failure. Option B. The business impact analysis did not sufficiently quantify the financial losses associated with a 4-hour system outage. Option C. The recovery strategy's reliance on nightly backups does not adequately support the specified 1-hour recovery point objective. Option D. The secondary data center lacks the necessary geographical diversity to mitigate regional disasters effectively. The correct answer is C. The recovery strategy's reliance on nightly backups does not adequately support the specified 1-hour recovery point objective. Explanation. The core of effective business continuity and disaster recovery planning within an ISO 27001-2013 framework, particularly concerning Clause 17, Business Continuity Management, involves a systematic approach to identifying critical business functions and establishing recovery strategies. The process begins with a thorough business impact analysis, BIA, to determine the criticality of information assets and business processes and the potential impact of disruptions. This analysis informs the development of recovery time objectives, RTO, and recovery point objectives, RPO, for each critical function. RTO defines the maximum acceptable downtime for a business process, while RPO specifies the maximum acceptable data loss. The choice of recovery strategies, such as data mirroring, off-site backups, or redundant infrastructure, is directly dictated by these RTOs and RPOs. For instance, a critical financial transaction system with a very low RTO and RPO would necessitate a more robust and immediate recovery solution, like active-active data centers, compared to a less critical internal reporting system that might tolerate a longer downtime and potential data loss. Therefore, the alignment of recovery strategies with the BIA's findings, specifically the defined RTOs and RPOs, is paramount for ensuring that the organization can resume critical operations within acceptable parameters following a disruptive event. This ensures that the Business Continuity Plan, BCP, and Disaster Recovery Plan, DRP, are practical, effective, and meet the organization's resilience requirements, thereby satisfying the intent of ISO 27001/2013 requirements. Question 3. When compiling the final audit report following an internal audit of an organization's information security management system, which approach to presenting findings would most effectively facilitate prompt and appropriate corrective actions by the auditee, considering the principles of ISO 27001/2013? Option A. Focusing exclusively on all identified nonconformities, detailing each minor deviation from documented procedures without providing context on their systemic impact. Option B. Emphasizing the auditor's personal opinions and subjective interpretations of the auditee's processes, coupled with a list of recommendations that are not directly tied to specific audit evidence. Option C. Providing a high-level summary of the audit scope and objectives, without enumerating specific findings or recommendations. To avoid overly burdening management, Option D. Presenting a balanced view of nonconformities, observations, and areas of good practice, supported by objective evidence, and clearly outlining the potential impact on the information security management system's effectiveness. The correct answer is D. Presenting a balanced view of nonconformities, observations, and areas of good practice, supported by objective evidence, and clearly outlining the potential impact on the information security management system's effectiveness. Explanation. The primary purpose of an audit report in the context of ISO 27001/2013 is to communicate the findings of the audit to the auditee and relevant stakeholders. This communication must be clear, concise, and actionable. Clause 9.2.3 of ISO 27001/2013 outlines the process of conducting internal audits, and while it doesn't explicitly detail the content of the audit report, the general principles of effective reporting apply. A crucial aspect of audit reporting is ensuring that the findings are presented in a way that facilitates understanding and drives improvement. This involves not only documenting nonconformities, but also providing positive observations and opportunities for improvement. The report should be objective, based on evidence gathered during the audit, and avoid making assumptions or unsubstantiated claims. The level of detail should be sufficient to support the findings without being overly verbose. The report serves as a formal record of the audit and is a key input for management review and the subsequent corrective action process. Therefore, the most effective approach for presenting audit findings to encourage prompt and appropriate action is to ensure the report is objective, evidence-based, and clearly articulates the implications of the findings for the information security management system's effectiveness. Question 4. An auditor is assessing an organization's information security management system, ISMS, for compliance with ISO 27001/2013. The organization handles a significant volume of sensitive customer financial data. During the audit, the auditor observes that employees often leave their workstations unlocked when stepping away for short periods. The organization's documented policies mention the importance of securing workstations. What specific evidence should the auditor seek to confirm the effective implementation of controls aimed at preventing unauthorized disclosure of information, particularly concerning workstation security and access to sensitive data? Option A. Records of firewall rule changes, vulnerability scan reports, and penetration testing results conducted in the last fiscal year. Option B. A comprehensive inventory of all IT assets, a detailed network diagram, and a list of all third-party vendors with access to the organization's systems. Option C. Evidence of regular user training on information security policies, system logs demonstrating automated screen locking after a defined period of inactivity, and documented procedures for user access reviews. Option D. A business continuity plan, disaster recovery procedures, and evidence of regular data backup operations. The correct answer is C. Evidence of regular user training on information security policies, system logs demonstrating automated screen locking after a defined period of inactivity, and documented procedures for user access reviews. Explanation. The scenario describes a situation where an organization is implementing an information security management system, ISMS, and has identified a critical need to protect sensitive customer data from unauthorized disclosure. The auditor's role is to verify that the controls implemented are effective and aligned with the organization's risk treatment plan and the requirements of ISO 27001-2013. Specifically, Annex A. 8.3, one clear desk and clear screen, and Annex A. 9.4, one information access restriction are directly relevant. Annex A. 8.3, one mandates that workstations should be left in a secure state when unattended, which includes locking screens. Annex A. 9.4, one requires that information is accessed only by those authorized, and this authorization is managed through access control mechanisms. The auditor would examine the policies and procedures related to workstation security, user access management, and evidence of enforcement. The presence of a documented policy for screen locking, coupled with evidence that users are trained on this policy, and that the policy is periodically reviewed and enforced, e.g., through periodic audits or system configurations, demonstrates conformity with Annex A. 8.3.1. Furthermore, the auditor would assess whether the access control mechanisms like user authentication and authorization levels effectively prevent unauthorized access to sensitive data, aligning with Annex A. 9.4.1. The question focuses on the auditor's verification process, emphasizing the evidence required to confirm the effectiveness of controls related to preventing unauthorized disclosure of information, which is a core objective of ISO 27001. The auditor is looking for evidence that the organization has not only defined controls, but also implemented and maintained them to achieve the stated security objectives. Question 5. An auditor is reviewing the implementation of Annex A controls at a financial services firm. The organization's documented access control policy clearly states the principle of least privilege, requiring users to be granted only the minimum necessary access rights to perform their duties. During an audit of the IT department, it is observed that the server administration group, while correctly populated with authorized administrators, has been granted broad read and write permissions to multiple critical systems, exceeding the specific functional needs of most individual administrators within that group. Which of the following represents the most significant area of nonconformity related to the ISM's requirements and Annex A controls? Option A. Inadequate procedure for user registration and deregistration. Option B. Insufficient frequency in the review of user access rights. Option C. Ineffective implementation of the least privilege principle within privileged access management. Option D. Failure to establish a comprehensive information security policy. The correct answer is C. Ineffective implementation of the least privilege principle within privileged access management. Explanation. The auditor is assessing the effectiveness of an organization's information security management system, ISMS, against the requirements of ISO 27001-2013, specifically focusing on Annex A controls. The scenario describes a situation where the organization has implemented a robust access control policy and procedure. However, during the audit, it's discovered that, while the policy dictates the principle of least privilege, the actual implementation in the IT department's server administration group allows for broader access than strictly necessary for individual roles. This deviation from the policy's intent, even if not explicitly violating a specific clause but undermining the control objective, is a critical finding. Annex A. 9.1.2, Access to networks and network services, and Annex A. 9.2.3, Management of privileged access, are directly relevant here. The control objective for a 9.2 is to ensure that access to information and information processing facilities is restricted to authorized users. The violation of the least privilege principle, even within a group, directly contravenes this objective and indicates a weakness in the implementation of the control. The auditor's role is to verify that controls are not just documented, but also effectively implemented and maintained, a finding that points to a discrepancy between documented policy and actual practice, especially concerning a fundamental security principle like least privilege, is a nonconformity. This nonconformity directly relates to the effectiveness of the ISMS in achieving its security objectives as outlined in the standard. The other options are less precise. While user registration and deregistration A9.2.1 and the review of user access rights A9.2.5 are important, the core issue identified is the overprivileging within an already authorized group, which is a direct consequence of not properly managing privileged access and adhering to least privilege. The requirement for a security policy, Clause 5.2, is broader, and while this finding relates to policy implementation, the specific impact is on access control effectiveness. Question 6. When auditing an organization's adherence to ISO 27001-2013, specifically focusing on the A8 Asset Management Clause, what is the most foundational and critical step an auditor must verify to ensure the ISMS is effectively managing its information assets? Option A. Examination of the documented procedures for the disposal of information assets, ensuring they align with organizational policies and legal obligations. Option B. Confirmation that a detailed asset classification scheme is in place, categorizing assets based on their confidentiality, integrity, and availability requirements. Option C. Assessment of the physical security measures implemented for all identified information assets, including environmental controls and access restrictions. Option D. Verification that a comprehensive inventory of all information assets exists, and that each asset has a clearly assigned owner responsible for its security. Correct answer is D. Verification that a comprehensive inventory of all information assets exists and that each asset has a clearly assigned owner responsible for its security. Explanation. The core of ISO 27001-2013, specifically within Annex A8 Asset Management, is the establishment of an asset inventory and the assignment of ownership for each asset. This process is fundamental to understanding what needs to be protected. The requirement for a documented inventory of information assets is explicitly stated in A8.1.1. Furthermore, A8.1.2 mandates that responsibilities for assets must be defined and allocated. This means that for every identified asset, there must be a designated individual or role accountable for its management and protection. Without a clear inventory, it is impossible to implement appropriate controls for asset classification, handling, and disposal. Similarly, without assigned ownership, accountability for security measures and incident response related to that asset becomes ambiguous, undermining the effectiveness of the entire information security management system, ISMS. Therefore, the most critical initial step in asset management, as per the standard, is the creation of a comprehensive inventory coupled with the clear assignment of ownership. This foundational step enables subsequent controls like classification, physical security, and acceptable use policies to be effectively applied. The GDPR, for instance, also emphasizes the need for organizations to understand their data assets and who is responsible for them to ensure compliance with data protection principles, reinforcing the importance of this ISO 27001 requirement. Question 7. Consider an organization audited for ISO 27001-2013 compliance following a significant data breach. The audit team observes that while the organization has a comprehensive risk assessment methodology and implemented a range of technical and organizational controls, a specific, highly granular control detailed in Annex A8.1.1 inventory of assets was not explicitly documented in the asset register, although the asset itself was identified and protected by other, more general controls. The organization can demonstrate that the overall security posture, risk management framework, and response to the incident were aligned with regulatory requirements and industry standards. Which principle of information security management is most critically demonstrated as being upheld by the organization in this scenario, despite the minor documentation gap? Option A, due diligence. Option B, defense in depth. Option C, separation of duties. Option D, least privilege. Correct answer is A, due diligence. Explanation. The principle of due diligence in information security management, as reflected in ISO 27001-2013, requires an organization to demonstrate that it has taken reasonable steps to protect its information assets. This involves identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities, assessing the risks, and implementing appropriate controls. Due diligence is a proactive and ongoing process. It is not a one-time event, but rather a continuous commitment to maintaining a robust security posture. When an incident occurs, demonstrating due diligence means showing that the organization had established and followed a comprehensive information security management system, ISMS, that aligned with industry best practices and legal obligations, such as those mandated by data protection regulations like GDPR or national cybersecurity laws. This includes having policies, procedures, and controls in place that are proportionate to the identified risks. The absence of a specific, named control, if the overall ISMS demonstrates a commitment to managing risks effectively and compliantly, does not automatically imply a failure of due diligence, provided that the implemented controls collectively address the identified risks adequately. The focus is on the effectiveness of the ISMS as a whole in managing information security risks. Question 8. An auditor is reviewing the scope of an organization's information security management system, ISMS, as defined in their documentation. The organization has excluded its recently acquired subsidiary, Innovate Solutions, from the ISMS scope, citing integration challenges and a planned phased approach to ISMS alignment. The auditor needs to assess the validity of this exclusion. What is the most critical factor the auditor should consider to determine if this exclusion is compliant with ISO 27001/2013 requirements? Option A. Whether the Innovate Solutions subsidiary operates in a jurisdiction with less stringent data protection laws compared to the parent organization's primary operating region. Option B. Whether the organization has a clear timeline and plan for integrating Innovate Solutions into the ISMS within the next fiscal year, as stipulated in their strategic business plan. Option C. Whether the exclusion of Innovate Solutions is supported by a documented risk assessment that demonstrates that the information assets and processes within the subsidiary do not pose a significant risk to the organization's overall information security objectives, and that the exclusion itself is not undermining the intended outcomes of the ISMS. Option D. Whether the organization has formally communicated the exclusion of Innovate Solutions to all its employees and external stakeholders, including customers and regulatory bodies. The correct answer is C. Whether the exclusion of Innovate Solutions is supported by a documented risk assessment that demonstrates that the information assets and processes within the subsidiary do not pose a significant risk to the organization's overall information security objectives, and that the exclusion itself is not undermining the intended outcomes of the ISMS. Explanation. The ISO 27001/2013 standard, specifically in Clause 4.3, Context of the Organization, and Annex A, 5, Information Security Policies, requires an organization to define the scope of its Information Security Management System, ISMS. This scope defines the boundaries and applicability of the ISMS within the organization. Clause 4.3 mandates that the organization must determine the external and internal issues relevant to its purpose and its strategic direction that affect its ability to achieve the intended outcome of its ISMS, and determine the requirements of interested parties. Based on these, the scope is established. Annex A, 5.1. 1. Management commitment to information security requires top management to demonstrate leadership and commitment to the ISMS, which includes ensuring the scope is defined and maintained. When auditing an organization's ISMS, an auditor must verify that the defined scope is appropriate, clearly documented, and that any exclusions from the scope are justified based on the organization's risk assessment and business needs, and that these exclusions do not adversely impact the organization's ability to deliver its products or services securely. The justification for exclusions must be linked to the overall risk treatment plan and the organization's ability to meet its information security objectives. Therefore, an auditor's primary concern regarding scope exclusions is their impact on the organization's overall information security posture and its ability to meet its obligations, including those arising from legal and regulatory requirements like GDPR or HIPAA, if applicable. The justification must be a direct consequence of the risk assessment process and the subsequent risk treatment decisions, demonstrating that the excluded elements do not pose an unacceptable risk that the organization has failed to address. Question 9. During an audit of an organization's information security management system, An auditor is evaluating the effectiveness of the information security policy. The organization has a comprehensive set of security standards and detailed operational procedures. However, the auditor observes that the high-level information security policy document appears to be a generic template with minimal customization, lacking specific references to the organization's unique business operations, critical information assets, or its commitment to complying with specific regulations like the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, as it pertains to the handling of personal data. What is the most significant deficiency identified in this scenario concerning the information security policy? Option A. The policy does not explicitly enumerate all technical security controls required by ISO 27001 Annex A. Option B. The existence of detailed standards and procedures renders the high-level policy redundant for operational security. Option C. The policy's generic nature indicates a lack of management commitment, but this is sufficiently mitigated by the presence of detailed operational procedures. Option D. The policy fails to provide a tailored and authoritative framework reflecting the organization's specific context and commitment to compliance. The correct answer is D. The policy fails to provide a tailored and authoritative framework reflecting the organization's specific context and commitment to compliance. Explanation: the primary purpose of an information security policy is to establish a high-level framework and direction for information security within an organization. It sets the tone, articulates management commitment, and defines the organization's stance on protecting its information assets, while standards provide specific requirements and procedures detail step-by-step instructions for implementation. The policy serves as the foundational document that guides the development and application of these more granular controls. An effective information security policy, as mandated by ISO 27001, 2013 Clause 5. 2. Should be approved by top management, communicated to all personnel, and regularly reviewed. It must address the organization's information security objectives and provide a basis for establishing information security rules. In the context of auditing, an auditor would assess whether the policy exists, is appropriately approved and communicated, and aligns with the organization's risk appetite and business objectives. The policy's comprehensiveness in addressing all relevant aspects of information security, including legal and regulatory compliance, is a key audit focus. It is the cornerstone upon which the entire information security management system, ISMS, is built, ensuring that all subsequent security activities are aligned with the organization's strategic goals and risk management approach. Question 10. An auditor is reviewing the information security management system of a financial institution that relies heavily on cloud-based services for customer data processing. The institution has contracted with a reputable cloud provider for infrastructure as a service, IaaS. The auditor's objective is to assess the effectiveness of controls related to supplier relationships, particularly Annex A. 15 of ISO 27001, 2013. What specific evidence would most strongly demonstrate compliance with the intent of Annex A? 15. 2. 1. Addressing security in supplier agreements in this scenario. Option A. Examination of the cloud provider's latest ISO 27001 certification, which confirms their adherence to general information security standards. Option B. Assessment of the institution's internal risk assessment methodology for identifying and categorizing third-party risks associated with outsourced services. Option C. Review of the executed IaaS contract, specifically looking for clauses that clearly define the cloud provider's responsibilities for data protection, incident response, and audit rights related to the institution's data. Option D. Analysis of the cloud provider's service level agreement, SLA, to confirm uptime and performance metrics for the IaaS offering. The correct answer is C. Review of the executed IaaS contract, specifically looking for clauses that clearly define the cloud provider's responsibilities for data protection, incident response, and audit rights related to the institution's data. Explanation: during an audit of a cloud service provider's information security management system, ISMS, an auditor is examining the controls related to supplier relationships, specifically Annex A. 15. The organization has outsourced critical IT infrastructure management to a third-party vendor. The auditor needs to verify that the organization has adequately addressed the security requirements for this outsourced service. Annex A. 15. 1. 1. Information security in the ICT supply chain, mandates that information security requirements are agreed upon with suppliers. This includes defining the scope of services, responsibilities, and security controls. Annex A 15.2. 1. Addressing security in supplier agreements requires that agreements with suppliers include provisions for information security. This means the contract must explicitly state the security obligations of the supplier, including data protection, incident notification, and audit rights. Annex A 15.3. 1. Managing security in the ICT supply chain requires ongoing monitoring and review of supplier performance against these agreed-upon security requirements. This involves periodic assessments or audits of the supplier's security practices. Considering these clauses, the most critical aspect to verify during the audit of the cloud service provider's ISMs concerning the outsourced IT infrastructure management is the presence and enforceability of explicit information security clauses within the contractual agreements with the vendor. These clauses should detail the security measures the vendor must implement, data handling procedures, and reporting obligations, thereby ensuring the organization's information assets are protected even when managed by a third party. Without these contractual safeguards, the organization cannot effectively manage the security risks associated with outsourcing. Question 11. Consider an audit scenario where an organization has formally designated the Chief Technology Officer, CTO, as the individual with overall responsibility for information security. What is the primary documentary evidence an ISO 27001-2013 auditor would seek to confirm the legitimacy and clarity of this assignment of responsibility? Option A. A formally approved charter or policy document explicitly assigning information security responsibilities to the CTO, detailing their authority and reporting structure. Option B. A general job description for the CTO that includes a broad statement about ensuring system integrity. Option C. Meeting minutes from a recent executive board meeting where the CTO verbally accepted the information security role. Option D. Evidence of the CTO attending a recent information security awareness training session. The correct answer is A. A formally approved charter or policy document explicitly assigning information security responsibilities to the CTO, detailing their authority and reporting structure. Explanation. The question probes the auditor's understanding of assigning responsibilities for information security within an organization, specifically concerning the roles and reporting lines as outlined in ISO 27001-2013, Annex A 6.1.1. The standard requires that information security responsibilities be defined and allocated. This involves ensuring that individuals understand their roles and that there is clear accountability. An auditor would look for documented policies, procedures, and organizational charts that delineate these responsibilities. The specific scenario describes a situation where the Chief Technology Officer, CTO, has been assigned overall responsibility for information security. This is a common and acceptable practice, as the CTO often possesses the technical expertise and oversight of the systems that process and store information. The auditor's role is to verify that this assignment is formally recognized, communicated, and that the CTO has the authority and resources to fulfill these duties. The existence of a documented charter or policy that clearly outlines the CTO's information security mandate, including reporting lines and decision-making authority, is crucial evidence. This ensures that the responsibility is not merely implied, but is an explicit part of the organizational structure and governance. Without such formal documentation and clear authority, the assignment of responsibility would be considered a deficiency, as it could lead to ambiguity and a lack of accountability. Therefore, the presence of a formally documented and communicated charter is the most critical factor in verifying the effectiveness of this assignment. Question 12. A comprehensive internal audit of a financial services firm's information security management system, compliant with ISO 27001-2013, identified a critical vulnerability in the customer data portal. The risk assessment concluded that the likelihood of exploitation of this vulnerability is high, and the potential impact on the organization, including regulatory fines under data protection laws and severe reputational damage, is assessed as severe. The organization's risk acceptance criteria permit the acceptance of low-impact risks with minimal likelihood, which risk treatment option would be the most appropriate and aligned with the intent of ISO 27001-2013 for this identified risk. Option A. Implement a suite of technical and procedural controls to reduce the likelihood and impact of the vulnerability being exploited. Option B. Formally document the acceptance of the risk, acknowledging the potential severe consequences without further action. Option C. Cease all operations involving the customer data portal until a complete system overhaul can be performed, which is projected to take over a year. Option D. Procure an insurance policy that covers potential financial losses arising from a data breach related to this vulnerability. The correct answer is A. Implement a suite of technical and procedural controls to reduce the likelihood and impact of the vulnerability being exploited. Explanation: ISO 27001, 2013 Clause 6. 1. 2. Requires an organization to establish and maintain a risk assessment process. This process involves identifying information security risks, analyzing and evaluating them, and selecting risk treatment options. When considering the treatment of identified risks, the standard outlines several options: avoid, transfer, mitigate, or accept. The selection of the appropriate treatment option is crucial and should be based on the organization's risk appetite and the potential impact of the risk. For a risk where the likelihood of occurrence is assessed as high and the potential impact on business continuity is severe, acceptance without any form of mitigation would generally not align with the principles of establishing and maintaining an effective information security management system. Mitigation, which involves implementing controls to reduce the likelihood or impact, or a combination of both, is typically the preferred approach for significant risks. Transferring the risk, such as through insurance, is another option, but it does not eliminate the risk itself, merely shifts the financial burden. Avoiding the risk by ceasing the activity that gives rise to it might be feasible in some cases but is often impractical. Therefore, for a risk with high likelihood and severe impact, implementing controls to reduce its potential consequences is the most appropriate response to ensure information security objectives are met. Question 13. An auditor is reviewing the information security risk management process at Veridian Corp. The organization has identified several potential threats to its customer database, including unauthorized access and data exfiltration. The risk assessment methodology states that risks are evaluated based on a matrix of likelihood and impact, with specific qualitative descriptors for each. However, during the audit, it's discovered that the decision to accept a particular risk, despite it falling into a high category according to the matrix, was based on an ad hoc discussion among senior management without explicit reference to predefined risk acceptance criteria, which aspect of the risk evaluation process, as mandated by ISO 27001, 2013, is most likely not being adequately implemented or evidenced by Veridian Corp. Option A. The frequency with which the risk assessment methodology is reviewed and updated by Veridian Corp. Option B. The thoroughness of the threat identification and vulnerability analysis performed on the customer database. Option C. The consistent application of documented risk acceptance criteria to inform risk treatment decisions. Option D. The implementation of technical controls to mitigate the identified risks of unauthorized access. The correct answer is C. The consistent application of documented risk acceptance criteria to inform risk treatment decisions. Explanation: the core of risk evaluation within ISO 27001, 2013, particularly from an auditor's perspective, lies in verifying that the organization has a consistent and documented methodology for assessing the significance of identified risks. This involves examining how the organization determines whether a risk is acceptable or requires treatment. Clause 6. 1. 2. Information Security Risk Assessment mandates that the organization define and implement a risk assessment process. This process must include criteria for accepting risks and the methods for risk assessment. The auditor's role is to ensure that these criteria are applied consistently and that the documented methodology for evaluating risk is followed. When an auditor reviews the risk evaluation process, they look for evidence that the organization has established clear criteria for determining the level of risk, e.g., by combining likelihood and impact ratings, and has a documented decision-making framework for whether identified risks meet the acceptance criteria. This evaluation ensures that the organization's approach to risk is systematic and aligned with its overall security objectives and business context, rather than being arbitrary or based on subjective judgment alone. The auditor must confirm that the organization's risk evaluation process is not merely a theoretical exercise, but is actively used to inform risk treatment decisions and demonstrate due diligence in managing information security. Question 14. An auditor is reviewing the information security management system of a cloud service provider. They discover that the organization's documented procedure for handling customer data deletion requests, which is intended to meet the requirements of Clause 8.3 of ISO 27001, 2013 information security for the use of information processing facilities, has not been consistently applied. Specifically, records indicate that for 15% of recent deletion requests from a particular customer segment, the data was not fully purged from secondary backup systems within the stipulated 30-day timeframe, even though the primary systems were cleared. This practice contradicts the explicit requirement in the procedure that all instances of customer data must be rendered unrecoverable across all storage media. What is the most appropriate classification of this finding as a nonconformity according to ISO 27001, 2013 audit principles? Option A. An observation, since the customer segment affected is only 15% of the total customer base, suggesting a localized issue rather than a systemic failure. Option B. A major nonconformity, because the failure to ensure complete data destruction across all storage media represents a significant breach of the organization's documented procedure and a potential failure of the information security management system to meet its stated objectives. Option C. A minor nonconformity, as the primary systems were cleared and the failure pertains to secondary backup systems with a partial delay in full purging. Option D. A recommendation for improvement, as the procedure is generally followed and the deviation is limited to specific backup media, which might be considered a lower risk. The correct answer is C. A minor nonconformity, as the primary systems were cleared and the failure pertains to secondary backup systems with a partial delay in full purging. Explanation: during an ISO 27001, 2013 audit of a financial services firm, a critical finding was documented. The organization's policy for acceptable use of information assets, as per Clause 5.2, stipulated that all external email communications containing sensitive client data must be encrypted using AES 256. However, during the audit, it was observed that a significant portion of outbound emails from the marketing department, which contained promotional material, but also client contact information, names and email addresses, were being sent without any encryption. This constitutes a direct deviation from the documented and approved policy. Furthermore, the risk assessment, as required by Clause 6.1.2, had identified the potential for unauthorized disclosure of client contact information as a moderate risk, and the control implemented policy requiring AES 256 encryption for sensitive data was intended to mitigate this. The absence of encryption on these emails directly violates the implemented control and the policy itself. This situation represents a nonconformity because the organization is not conforming to its own established requirements for information security, specifically concerning the protection of client contact data during external transmission. This finding would be classified as a major nonconformity if it indicates a systemic failure or a significant breakdown in the information security management system, or a minor nonconformity if it is an isolated incident with limited impact and the organization can demonstrate that the control is generally effective. The core issue is the failure to adhere to a defined policy and control. Question 15. An auditor is reviewing an organization's adherence to ISO 27001-2013 with a particular focus on Annex A.13, Communication Security. The organization relies heavily on a third-party cloud provider for data processing and storage and has implemented robust encryption for data flowing between its internal network and the cloud. However, during the audit, it was discovered that there are no explicit, documented procedures or policies governing the secure transmission of information to other external business partners or suppliers who periodically receive sensitive data extracts or reports. What is the most appropriate auditor action to address this finding concerning the protection of information in transit? Option A. Suggests that the organization conduct a new risk assessment solely focused on data transmission to external partners, independent of existing risk management processes. Option B. Recommend the development and implementation of documented policies and procedures for the secure exchange of information with all external parties, ensuring consistency with the organization's information security policy and risk assessment. Option C. Advise the organization to rely on the general clauses of the information security policy to govern all external communications, assuming that all employees understand the security implications. Option D. Conclude that the organization is compliant with A. 13.1. 3. As long as the primary cloud communication is encrypted, as this represents the most critical data flow. Correct answer is B. Recommend the development and implementation of documented policies and procedures for the secure exchange of information with all external parties, ensuring consistency with the organization's information security policy and risk assessment. Explanation. The scenario describes an audit of an organization's compliance with ISO 27001-2013, specifically focusing on the controls within Annex A. 13. Communication security. The auditor is examining the effectiveness of controls related to the protection of information transferred between organizations and between interested parties. The organization utilizes a third-party cloud service provider for critical data processing and storage, necessitating secure communication channels. The audit finding highlights that, while the organization has implemented encryption for data in transit between its on-premises systems and the cloud provider, there is no documented policy or procedure specifically addressing the secure exchange of information with external entities beyond the primary cloud provider, such as business partners or suppliers who might receive reports or data extracts. This gap indicates a potential weakness in the comprehensive application of a 13.1.3 protection of information in transit, which mandates that information in transit should be protected by appropriate protection against accidental or unauthorized disclosure or modification. The absence of specific documented procedures for other external communications means that the level of protection for these exchanges might be inconsistent or inadequate, potentially exposing sensitive information to risks. Therefore, the most appropriate auditor action is to recommend the development and implementation of specific policies and procedures for secure information exchange with all external parties, ensuring that the scope of protection aligns with the organization's information security policy and risk assessment. This directly addresses the identified gap in comprehensive communication security controls beyond the primary cloud provider relationship. Question 16. During an audit of a financial services firm's information security management system, ISMS, based on ISO 27001-2013, an auditor discovers a significant nonconformity related to inadequate access control reviews for privileged accounts. The ISMS manager has documented a corrective action plan that involves retraining staff on access control policies and updating the review procedure. What is the most critical aspect for the auditor to verify regarding the implementation of this corrective action to ensure its effectiveness in preventing recurrence? Option A. Confirmation that the root cause of the inadequate reviews was thoroughly investigated and addressed by the chosen actions, and evidence of the effectiveness of these actions being evaluated. Option B. Verification that the retraining session was conducted within the specified timeframe outlined in the corrective action plan. Option C. Assessment of the number of staff who attended the retraining session and their immediate feedback on the training's clarity. Option D. Examination of the updated access control procedure document to ensure it meets all regulatory requirements, such as those mandated by GDPR or similar data protection laws. The correct answer is A. Confirmation that the root cause of the inadequate reviews was thoroughly investigated and addressed by the chosen actions, and evidence of the effectiveness of these actions being evaluated. Explanation. The ISO 27001-2013 standard, specifically Clause 10.1 on nonconformity and corrective action, mandates a systematic approach to addressing nonconformities. When a nonconformity is identified, organization must take action to control and correct it. This involves determining the causes of the nonconformity and implementing corrective actions to prevent recurrence. The effectiveness of these corrective actions must be reviewed. For an auditor, evaluating the implementation of corrective actions involves verifying that the root cause analysis was thorough, the chosen actions are appropriate and sufficient to address the root cause, and that these actions have been implemented as planned. Furthermore, the auditor must confirm that the impact of the nonconformity and the corrective actions taken have been assessed, and that any necessary changes to the ISM's documentation or processes have been made. The focus is on demonstrating that the ISMS is continuously improving and that identified weaknesses are being effectively managed. This process aligns with the Plan Do Check Act, PDCA, cycle inherent in ISO 27001, ensuring that learning from nonconformities leads to a stronger security posture. An auditor would look for evidence of the entire life cycle of corrective action, from identification and root cause analysis through to implementation, effectiveness review, and closure, ensuring that the organization's response is robust and contributes to the overall security objectives. Question 17. When auditing an organization's system acquisition and development processes under ISO 27001-2013, which phase of the project lifecycle presents the most opportune and effective point for an auditor to verify that information security requirements have been fundamentally integrated into the system's design from its inception? Option A, the review and approval of operational security procedures. Option B, the securing of application services and system interfaces. Option C, the formal security testing and vulnerability assessment phase. Option D, the initial analysis and specification of information security requirements. The correct answer is D, the initial analysis and specification of information security requirements. Explanation: the core principle being tested here is the auditor's role in verifying the integration of security requirements into the system development lifecycle, specifically during the acquisition or development phase. Annex A, 14. 1 of ISO 27001, 2013, Information Security Requirements Analysis and Specification, mandates that information security requirements must be identified and specified for all information systems, considering the business requirements and information risks. An auditor would examine evidence that security considerations were part of the initial design and specification, not an afterthought. This includes reviewing project documentation, requirement specification, and any security impact assessments conducted early in the process. The question focuses on the most critical point for integrating security: the initial definition of what the system should do and how it should operate, ensuring that security is a fundamental attribute from inception. Other options represent later stages or less direct evidence of initial security integration. For instance, testing for vulnerabilities. A 14.2.5 is a post-development activity, while securing the application services. A 14.2.8 relates to operational security of deployed systems. The review of operational procedures. A 14.2.9 is also a post-implementation check. Therefore, the most appropriate audit focus for ensuring security is built in from the start is the analysis and specification of information security requirements. Question 18. An organization is preparing for its scheduled management review of the Information Security Management System, ISMS, in accordance with ISO 27001-2013. The ISMS manager is compiling the necessary documentation to present to senior leadership. Considering the requirements for management review inputs, which of the following sets of information would be most crucial for evaluating the ISM's ongoing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness? Option A, a general assessment of the effectiveness of all implemented security controls without specific performance metrics. Option B, results of internal and external audits, status of actions from previous management reviews, and feedback from interested parties regarding information security. Option C, customer satisfaction surveys related to data privacy and overall service reliability. Option D, the comprehensive risk assessment methodology and its documented application across all business units. Correct answer is B, results of internal and external audits, status of actions from previous management reviews, and feedback from interested parties regarding information security. Explanation: the management review process, as stipulated by ISO 27001-2013 Clause 9.3, requires that top management periodically review the Information Security Management System, ISMS, to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. Clause 9.3.2, Management Review Inputs, specifies the information that must be considered during this review. This includes feedback from interested parties, changes in information security needs and risks, performance of the ISMS, results of audits and reviews, and the status of corrective actions. The objective is to identify areas for improvement and to make decisions regarding the ISMS. Option A, accurately reflects a critical input by referencing the outcomes of internal and external audits and the status of previous management review actions, which are fundamental for assessing ISM's effectiveness and driving improvement. Option B is incorrect because while customer satisfaction is important, it's a component of feedback from interested parties, not a standalone primary input for the entire ISM's review. Option C is partially relevant as risk assessment is an ongoing process, but the specific input to management review is the asterisk results asterisk of the risk assessment, and the asterisk changes asterisk in risks, not the entire risk assessment process itself. Option D is incorrect because while the effectiveness of controls is evaluated, the primary input related to controls is derived from audit findings and performance metrics, not a general statement about control effectiveness without evidence. Question 19. During an audit of an organization's information security management system, an auditor is reviewing the implementation of cryptographic controls as per ISO 27001-2013 Annex A-10. The organization has a documented policy for the use of cryptography, which outlines general principles. However, the auditor observes that the specific methods for key management, including generation, storage, and revocation, are only detailed in informal team discussions and not in formal approved procedures. Furthermore, the policy does not explicitly reference the applicable data protection regulations of the jurisdiction where the organization operates, which mandate specific encryption standards for sensitive personal data. Which of the following findings would represent the most significant deficiency in the organization's adherence to A-10? 1. Option A. The use of an outdated version of a widely accepted encryption algorithm that is still considered secure for current data protection needs. Option B. The absence of a formal cryptography policy altogether, relying solely on implicit understanding within the IT department. Option C. The existence of a general policy for cryptography without specific details on algorithm strength or the types of information to be protected. Option D. Lack of formal, documented procedures for key management and insufficient explicit reference to relevant legal and regulatory requirements in the cryptography policy. The correct answer is D. Lack of formal, documented procedures for key management and insufficient explicit reference to relevant legal and regulatory requirements in the cryptography policy. Explanation: the core principle of A-10. 1 in ISO 27001-2013 is that cryptographic controls should be implemented based on a defined policy and procedures, considering legal and regulatory requirements. This means that the selection, implementation, and management of cryptographic techniques must be systematic and documented. The policy should dictate the acceptable use of cryptography, including key management practices, algorithm strength, and the types of information to be protected. Procedures would then detail how these policies are enacted, covering aspects like algorithm selection, key generation, distribution, storage, and destruction. Legal and regulatory requirements, such as those concerning data privacy, e.g., GDPR, HIPAA, or specific industry mandates, must be factored into the policy and procedural design, as noncompliance can lead to significant penalties. For instance, if a jurisdiction mandates specific encryption standards for financial data, the organization's cryptography policy and its implementation must adhere to these mandates. An auditor would examine the documented cryptography policy, supporting procedures, evidence of their implementation, and how legal and regulatory compliance is integrated into these processes. The policy serves as the foundation, guiding all subsequent cryptographic activities to ensure effectiveness and adherence to external obligations. Question 20. An auditor is reviewing the risk treatment plan for a financial services firm. The firm has identified a significant risk related to the potential unauthorized disclosure of sensitive client financial data due to a legacy system with known vulnerabilities. Existing controls have reduced the likelihood and impact, but the residual risk remains high according to the organization's risk assessment matrix. The firm's management has decided not to implement further technical controls on the legacy system, citing prohibitive upgrade costs and the system's impending decommissioning in 18 months. Instead, they have increased the frequency of manual data access audits and implemented a stricter policy for data handling by personnel interacting with the system. Which risk treatment option has the firm primarily adopted for this residual risk? Option A, risk transfer. Option B, risk avoidance. Option C, risk acceptance. Option D, risk mitigation. The correct answer is C, Risk acceptance. Explanation. The core of risk treatment in ISO 27001-2013 involves selecting the most appropriate option based on the residual risk assessment and organizational context. When a risk's likelihood and impact are deemed unacceptable after considering existing controls, the organization must decide how to manage it. The primary options are to modify the risk, reduce, avoid, or transfer, or accept it if the residual risk is within the organization's risk appetite. Accepting a risk does not mean ignoring it. It means acknowledging the risk and its potential consequences without implementing new controls, often because the cost of controls outweighs the potential impact, or the risk is deemed an inherent part of the business. This decision requires careful consideration of the cost-effectiveness of controls versus the potential damage, and alignment with the organization's overall risk management strategy and legal/regulatory obligations. The selection of the appropriate risk treatment option is a critical step in the risk management process, ensuring that information security measures are proportionate to the identified risks. It's important to note that acceptance is a formal decision, not an oversight, and should be documented. Question 21. An auditor is assessing the implementation of ISO 27001-2013 Annex A. 14 controls at a global e-commerce platform. The organization has a mature software development lifecycle with automated code scanning and regular penetration testing of new releases. However, during the audit, it is noted that there is no distinct, documented policy specifically addressing the application of secure system engineering principles across all development projects, nor is there a clearly defined and consistently applied procedure for managing technical vulnerabilities that emerge after a system has been deployed and is in operational use, particularly those identified through continuous monitoring or external threat intelligence. Which of the following represents the most significant nonconformity with respect to Annex A 14, given the information provided? Option A. Lack of specific controls for managing third-party software components within the development process. Option B. Absence of a documented policy for secure system engineering and a formal process for ongoing technical vulnerability management. Option C. Insufficient application of secure development policies, despite the presence of automated code scanning tools. Option D. Inadequate coverage of system security testing, as penetration testing alone does not encompass all necessary security validation. The correct answer is B. Absence of a documented policy for secure system engineering and a formal process for ongoing technical vulnerability management. Explanation. The scenario describes an auditor examining the implementation of Annex A 14, system acquisition, development, and maintenance, within a financial services organization. The auditor is specifically reviewing the controls related to secure system engineering principles. Annex A 14.1 mandates the application of secure development policies. Annex A 14.2 requires a documented policy for secure system engineering. Annex A 14.2 focuses on system security testing, and Annex A 14.2 addresses the management of technical vulnerabilities. The organization has implemented rigorous code reviews, static analysis tools, and penetration testing as part of its development lifecycle. However, the auditor discovers that, while these practices are in place, there is no formal, documented policy explicitly outlining the organization's commitment to secure system engineering principles, nor is there a systematic process for identifying and addressing technical vulnerabilities discovered post-deployment that are not directly related to the development phase itself, but rather to the ongoing operation and maintenance of the system. The absence of a documented policy for secure system engineering, A 14.2.1, and a robust mechanism for managing technical vulnerabilities throughout the system's lifecycle, A 14.2.3, represents a significant gap, while A 14.2.2 system security testing is partially addressed through penetration testing. The lack of a comprehensive vulnerability management process that spans development and operational phases is a compliance issue. Therefore, the most critical finding for the auditor, directly stemming from the described practices and their deficiencies concerning Annex A 14, is the lack of a formalized, documented policy for secure system engineering and a comprehensive vulnerability management process. Question 22. During an audit of an organization's ISMs, A recurring nonconformity is identified where sensitive client data was inadvertently exposed due to an employee sharing an unencrypted file via a public cloud storage service. While immediate corrective actions involved revoking access to the service and retraining the employee, the auditor is probing deeper to understand the underlying systemic failures. Which of the following most accurately reflects the likely root cause that an effective root cause analysis process would aim to uncover in this scenario, according to ISO 27001-2013 principles? Option A. A temporary lapse in the organization's network monitoring capabilities at the time of the incident. Option B. The absence of a specific clause in the ISM's documentation prohibiting the use of public cloud storage for sensitive data. Option C. Inadequate implementation and enforcement of the organization's data handling and acceptable use policies regarding cloud services and data encryption. Option D. The employee's lack of personal diligence in verifying the security of the cloud storage service used. The correct answer is C. Inadequate implementation and enforcement of the organization's data handling and acceptable use policies regarding cloud services and data encryption. Explanation. The core principle of root cause analysis within an ISO 27001-2013 framework is to identify the fundamental reasons behind nonconformities or incidents, rather than just addressing the immediate symptoms. This systematic approach ensures that corrective actions are effective and prevent recurrence. Clause 10. 1 of ISO 27001-2013, Nonconformity and Corrective Action, mandates that the organization shall take action to eliminate the causes of nonconformities in order to prevent recurrence. This involves reviewing the nonconformity, determining the causes, examining the causes of other nonconformities, implementing corrective action, reviewing the effectiveness of corrective action, and updating risk assessments and the ISMs as necessary. A robust root cause analysis process, often employing techniques like the 5 Whys or Ishikawa diagrams, delves deeper than surface-level issues. For instance, if an access control violation is identified, the symptom, simply revoking the user's access, is a superficial fix. A root cause analysis would investigate why the access was granted inappropriately in the first place, perhaps due to a flawed access request process, inadequate segregation of duty, or insufficient training for personnel responsible for granting access. By identifying these underlying systemic issues, the organization can implement more comprehensive and lasting solutions, such as revising the access control policy, enhancing training modules, or automating parts of the access request workflow. This proactive stance is crucial for continuous improvement of the Information Security Management System, ISMS, and maintaining its effectiveness against evolving threats. Question 23. During an audit of an organization's information security management system, an auditor is evaluating the effectiveness of physical and environmental security controls, specifically those designed to protect against external and environmental threats, as outlined in ISO 27001-2013. The auditor observes that the organization has robust access control mechanisms for its data center, but has not documented any specific measures to mitigate risks from localized flooding due to extreme weather events impacting the building's basement server room. Which of the following actions by the auditor would be most appropriate to ensure compliance with Annex A? 11. Option A. Focus solely on the documented access control procedures for the data center, as this is the primary physical security concern for IT infrastructure. Option B. Request evidence of the organization's risk assessment process that identifies and addresses potential environmental threats, and verify the implementation of corresponding mitigation controls for the identified risks. Option C. Advise the organization to immediately relocate all critical IT infrastructure to a facility with superior environmental protection, irrespective of the current risk assessment. Option D. Recommend a review of the organization's cybersecurity policies related to data backup and recovery, assuming environmental threats are adequately covered by these. The correct answer is B. Request evidence of the organization's risk assessment process that identifies and addresses potential environmental threats, and verify the implementation of corresponding mitigation controls for the identified risks. Explanation. The question probes the auditor's role in verifying the effectiveness of physical security controls as mandated by ISO 27001-2013 Annex A. 11. specifically, focuses on the controls related to protection against environmental threats. When an auditor reviews the effectiveness of physical security measures, they must assess not only the direct security of access, but also the resilience of the environment to external factors that could compromise information assets. Annex A, 11. 1. 2. Physical entry controls and A. 11. 2. Securing offices, rooms, and facilities are relevant. However, A. 11. 1. 3. Securing services and A. 11. 1. 4. Protecting against external and environmental threats are particularly pertinent to the scenario presented. An auditor must verify that the organization has identified potential environmental hazards such as fire, flood, or power failure, and has implemented appropriate controls to mitigate these risks. This includes examining evidence of risk assessments related to these threats, the existence of backup power systems, fire suppression systems, water detection systems, and disaster recovery plans that address environmental impacts. The effectiveness of these controls is demonstrated through documented procedures, regular testing, and evidence of their successful operation during past incidents or drills. Therefore, verifying the existence and operational status of environmental hazard mitigation measures is a crucial aspect of an auditor's assessment of physical and environmental security. Question 24. An auditor is reviewing the business continuity plan of a financial services firm, Quantum Financials, which processes sensitive client transaction data. The firm experienced a significant data center outage last quarter due to a power surge. During the audit, the auditor needs to assess the effectiveness of Quantum Financial's response to ensure the continuity of its information security management system. What specific aspect of the business continuity plan should the auditor prioritize for evaluation to determine its adequacy in maintaining information security during and after such an incident? Option A. The inventory of alternative office locations and their readiness for staff deployment. Option B. The communication plan for notifying stakeholders about the outage and recovery progress. Option C. The contractual agreements with third-party vendors for hardware replacement. Option D. The documented procedures for the timely restoration of critical information processing capabilities and associated security controls. The correct answer is D. The documented procedures for the timely restoration of critical information processing capabilities and associated security controls. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 27001-2013 Annex A. 17. Information security aspects of business continuity management is to ensure the availability of information and information processing facilities. When assessing an organization's business continuity plan, BCP, for information security, an auditor must verify that the plan adequately addresses the recovery of critical information assets and the systems that process them within acceptable timeframes. This involves reviewing documented procedures for restoring operations, testing the effectiveness of these procedures, and ensuring that information security controls are maintained or re-established during and after a disruption. The emphasis is on continuity of essential business functions, which inherently relies on the availability and integrity of information. Therefore, the most critical aspect for an auditor to evaluate is the documented process for resuming information processing activities, as this directly impacts the organization's ability to continue operations and maintain its information security posture during a disruptive event. Other elements, while important for a comprehensive BCP, are secondary to the direct recovery of information processing capabilities in the context of information security continuity. Question 25. An auditor is reviewing the statement of applicability, SOA, for a financial services firm. The firm's risk assessment identified a moderate risk of unauthorized access to sensitive customer data due to the use of legacy systems. The risk treatment plan opted for risk reduction through enhanced access controls and regular security awareness training. However, the SOA lists only A. 9. 1. 2 secure login procedures as applicable, with a note stating that other access control measures are not deemed necessary at this time due to compensating controls in place. What critical aspect of the SOA's linkage to the risk treatment process is the auditor most likely to investigate further? Option A. The number of Annex A controls that were excluded in total to assess the overall scope of the ISMs. Option B. The frequency of review for the SOA to ensure it is updated according to ISO 27001-2013 requirements. Option C. The specific compensating controls mentioned and their documented effectiveness in mitigating the identified risk of unauthorized access to legacy systems. Option D. The organization's policy on the use of legacy systems and any compliance requirements mandated by financial regulations. The correct answer is C. The specific compensating controls mentioned and their documented effectiveness in mitigating the identified risk of unauthorized access to legacy systems. Explanation. The Statement of Applicability, SOA, is a crucial document in ISO 27001-2013, detailing which Annexa controls are applicable to the organization's Information Security Management System, ISMS, and providing a justification for their inclusion or exclusion. When an organization is undergoing an audit, the auditor's primary focus regarding the SOA is to verify that the process of selecting and justifying controls is robust and aligns with the organization's risk assessment and risk treatment processes. The auditor will examine the documented risk assessment methodology to ensure it is consistently applied and that the identified risks directly inform the selection of controls. Furthermore, the auditor will scrutinize the justification for both included and excluded controls. For included controls, the auditor looks for evidence of implementation and operational effectiveness. For excluded controls, the auditor requires a clear and logical rationale, often tied to the risk treatment plan, demonstrating that the exclusion does not leave the organization exposed to unacceptable residual risks. The auditor also verifies that the SOA is a living document, regularly reviewed and updated to reflect changes in the organization's risk profile, business objectives, and the threat landscape. The linkage between the risk treatment plan and the SOA is paramount. The SOA should accurately reflect the chosen risk treatment options and the resulting control set. For instance, if a risk treatment option is risk reduction, the auditor expects to see relevant controls from Annexa implemented in the SOA to achieve that reduction. If the option is risk acceptance, the auditor expects to see a documented justification for accepting the residual risk, which should be consistent with the organization's risk acceptance criteria. The auditor's role is to confirm that the SOA is not merely a checklist but a well-reasoned output of the ISMS, demonstrating due diligence in managing information security risks. Question 26. During an audit of a global logistics firm's ISMS, an auditor notes that controls related to the secure handling of sensitive payment card data, e.g., Annex A941, A942, A943, have been excluded from the ISM scope. The firm's statement of applicability provides a brief justification stating these controls are not applicable as the organization does not directly process or store customer payment card information. The firm's primary business involves the transportation of goods and associated tracking services, with customer interactions primarily focused on shipping details and invoices, which are processed through a separate, third-party payment gateway. The auditor needs to assess if this exclusion is adequately justified according to ISO 27001-2013 requirements. What is the most critical factor the auditor should consider when evaluating the validity of this exclusion? Option A. Whether the organization has formally documented a policy that explicitly prohibits the processing or storage of any payment card information within its direct operational environment, regardless of third-party involvement. Option B. Whether the exclusion of these specific controls has been communicated to all employees and stakeholders who might interact with customer payment information, even indirectly, through internal memos or training sessions. Option C. Whether the organization's risk assessment adequately identified and evaluated all potential threats and vulnerabilities related to payment card data, even if processed by a third party, and whether the decision to exclude these controls aligns with the documented risk treatment plan and the overall security objectives of the ISMS. Option D. Whether the organization has obtained a formal certification or attestation from the third-party payment gateway, confirming their compliance with relevant payment card industry standards. The correct answer is C. Whether the organization's risk assessment adequately identified and evaluated all potential threats and vulnerabilities related to payment card data, even if processed by a third party, and whether the decision to exclude these controls aligns with the documented risk treatment plan and the overall security objectives of the ISMS. Explanation. The scope of an Information Security Management System, ISMS, is a fundamental aspect of ISO 27001-2013. Clause 4. 3. Context of the organization requires the organization to determine the boundaries and applicability of the isms. This determination must be documented and justified. When an organization chooses to exclude certain controls or parts of the standard from its isms, a clear and logical justification must be provided in the statement of applicability. So A. This justification should be based on the organization's risk assessment and treatment process, considering the specific business objectives, legal and regulatory requirements, and the nature of the information assets. For example, if an organization does not possess or process any customer financial data, excluding controls related to PCI DSS compliance, which is often a specific financial industry standard, might be justifiable. However, the exclusion must be demonstrably linked to the absence of relevant risks or requirements. The justification must be reviewed and approved by management. The absence of a specific control should not compromise the overall security posture of the isms. A robust risk assessment will identify all relevant threats and vulnerabilities, and the treatment plan will dictate which controls are necessary. If a control is excluded, it implies that the risk associated with not implementing that control has been assessed as acceptable or is not applicable to the defined scope of the isms. The statement of applicability is the primary document where these exclusions and their justifications are recorded for review by auditors. Question 27. During an audit of an organization that heavily relies on a third-party cloud provider for critical data storage and processing, a significant security incident at the provider has been disclosed, impacting the confidentiality and integrity of the organization's sensitive information. The organization's internal security team has confirmed that the provider's security controls were demonstrably insufficient during the incident. What should an ISO 27001-2013 auditor primarily focus on verifying to assess the organization's compliance with Annex A, 15? 1. Information security and the information security requirements of suppliers in this context. Option A. The personal liability insurance policies held by the key IT personnel at the cloud service provider to cover potential damages. Option B. The provider's public statements and marketing materials detailing their commitment to data security and compliance with industry best practices. Option C. The organization's internal policies and procedures for selecting new cloud service providers, assuming the current provider's inadequacy necessitates a replacement. Option D. The existence and enforceability of contractual clauses within the agreement with the cloud provider that explicitly define information security responsibilities, incident notification procedures, and remedies for security breaches. The correct answer is D. The existence and enforceability of contractual clauses within the agreement with the cloud provider that explicitly define information security responsibilities, incident notification procedures, and remedies for security breaches. Explanation. The scenario describes a situation where a cloud service provider, crucial to an organization's operations, has experienced a significant security incident affecting data confidentiality and integrity. ISO 27001-2013, specifically Annex A, 15. 1. Mandates that an organization should have an agreement with suppliers that includes requirements for information security. This agreement should cover aspects such as the supplier's responsibility for information security, their commitment to protecting the organization's information assets, and the process for handling security incidents. When a supplier fails to meet these agreed-upon security obligations, the organization must have established procedures to manage this noncompliance. This involves assessing the impact of the incident on the organization's information security objectives, reviewing the supplier's contractual obligations regarding security, and determining appropriate corrective actions. These actions could range from demanding immediate remediation from the supplier, imposing penalties as per the contract, to ultimately terminating the relationship if the risks are unmanageable. The core principle is to ensure that the organization's information security posture is not compromised due to the actions or inactions of its suppliers, and that contractual mechanisms are in place to address such breaches. Therefore, the most appropriate action for the auditor to verify is the existence and application of contractual clauses that address supplier security obligations and incident response, ensuring that the organization has a framework to manage such breaches and enforce accountability. Question 28. Consider a scenario where an internal audit of a technology firm, Innovate Solutions, reveals that the marketing department has independently created and implemented its own data handling procedures for customer information, which appear to conflict with the organization's officially approved information security policy. The marketing team states they were unaware of specific nuances in the central policy that impacted their daily operations. What is the primary responsibility of the information security auditor in addressing this situation, according to ISO 27001-2013, Clause A, 6? Option A. Verify the effectiveness of the communication and understanding of the information security policy across all organizational levels, including specific departments. Option B. Immediately mandate the marketing department to cease all their data handling activities until a full policy review is completed by senior management. Option C. Recommend the immediate termination of the marketing department's head for failing to ensure compliance with organizational policies. Option D. Focus solely on updating the central information security policy to incorporate the marketing department's practices to avoid future conflicts. The correct answer is A. Verify the effectiveness of the communication and understanding of the information security policy across all organizational levels, including specific departments. Explanation. The scenario describes an organization where an information security policy exists, but its communication and understanding across different departments are inconsistent. Specifically, the marketing department has developed its own set of guidelines that appear to contradict the overarching information security policy regarding the handling of customer data. ISO 27001-2013 under Clause A, 6.1.1 emphasizes the need for information security policies to be approved by management, published, and communicated to all employees and relevant external parties. Furthermore, Clause A, 6.1.2 Information security roles and responsibilities requires that roles and responsibilities for information security be defined and allocated. When an internal audit reveals that a department's practices diverge from the established policy, it indicates a breakdown in the communication and enforcement mechanisms of the ISMs. The most appropriate action for the auditor in this case is to identify the root cause of this divergence. This involves understanding why the marketing department created its own guidelines, and whether this action was a deliberate circumvention of the policy or a result of a lack of awareness or understanding of the official policy's requirements. The auditor's role is to assess the effectiveness of the ISM's controls, and a departmental policy that conflicts with the organizational policy signifies a control weakness. Therefore, verifying the communication and understanding of the information security policy across all organizational levels, including specific departments like marketing, is crucial. This verification process would involve reviewing relevant documentation, conducting interviews, and observing practices to confirm that the policy is indeed understood and adhered to. The auditor must determine if the existing communication channels are adequate and if any training or awareness programs are insufficient, leading to such discrepancies. Question 29. Consider a scenario where an internal audit of an organization's ISMs, compliant with ISO 27001-2013, identified a recurring nonconformity related to the improper disposal of sensitive documents, leading to a potential breach of Clause A. 8.3.2 Disposal of media. The corrective action implemented was to provide mandatory training to all personnel involved in document handling and to update the documented procedure for media disposal. During the subsequent surveillance audit, the auditor finds that, while the training records are complete and the procedure has been updated, instances of improper disposal still appear in the incident logs. What is the most appropriate conclusion regarding the effectiveness of the corrective action from an ISO 27001-2013 auditing perspective? Option A. The corrective action is considered effective because the required documentation, training, and updated procedure has been completed, fulfilling the requirements of Clause 10.1. Option B. The corrective action is partially effective because the updated procedure addresses the systemic issue, even though individual compliance is lacking. Option C. The corrective action's effectiveness cannot be determined without further investigation into the specific individuals responsible for the continued improper disposal. Option D. The corrective action has not been effective as the root cause of the nonconformity has not been adequately addressed, evidenced by the recurrence of the issue. The correct answer is D. The corrective action has not been effective as the root cause of the nonconformity has not been adequately addressed, evidenced by the recurrence of the issue. Explanation: ISO 27001, 2013 Clause 10. 1. Nonconformity and corrective action mandates that an organization address nonconformities and take action to control and correct them. The effectiveness of these corrective actions is crucial for continuous improvement of the Information Security Management System, ISMS. When evaluating the effectiveness of a corrective action, an auditor looks for evidence that the root cause of the nonconformity has been addressed and that the nonconformity has not recurred. This involves reviewing records of the implemented corrective action, checking for evidence of its application, and assessing the impact on the ISMS. For instance, if a nonconformity was identified regarding insufficient access controls to a sensitive database, a corrective action might involve implementing multi-factor authentication and enhancing user privilege reviews. The auditor would then seek evidence that multi-factor authentication is consistently applied, that the review process is documented and followed, and that there have been no subsequent unauthorized access incidents related to that database. Simply documenting the action is insufficient. Demonstrable proof of its successful implementation and sustained impact is required. This includes verifying that the action has eliminated the original cause and has not introduced new risks or nonconformities. The auditor's assessment focuses on whether the ISMS has been strengthened as a result of the corrective action. Question 30. Consider a scenario where a financial services firm experiences a sophisticated cyber attack. The attack vector allowed an unauthorized external party to gain access to a database containing confidential client investment portfolios. This intruder then altered specific transaction records within the database before exfiltrating a subset of the client data. As a direct consequence, the firm's trading platform was temporarily taken offline for several hours due to the corrupted data, preventing legitimate traders from executing any transactions. From an ISO 27001, 2013 perspective, what best describes the information security failure observed in this incident? Option A. A violation of integrity due to data alteration, leading to a denial of service. Option B. A complete compromise of the CIA triad, affecting confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Option C. A failure in access control mechanisms resulting in unauthorized disclosure. Option D. A primary breach of confidentiality with a secondary impact on availability. The correct answer is B. A complete compromise of the CIA triad, affecting confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Explanation: the core of information security is safeguarding assets by ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality pertains to preventing unauthorized disclosure of information. Integrity means ensuring that information is accurate, complete, and has not been altered without authorization. Availability ensures that authorized users can access information and associated assets when needed. In the context of an ISO 27001-2013 audit, an auditor must assess how effectively an organization's controls protect against threats to these three pillars. A scenario involving unauthorized access to sensitive client data, leading to its modification and subsequent unavailability for a critical business process, directly impacts all three aspects of the CIA triad. Unauthorized access breaches confidentiality. The modification of data violates integrity. The inability to access the data for the business process demonstrates a failure in availability. Therefore, the most comprehensive description of the security failure in such a scenario is the compromise of all three principles. This understanding is fundamental for an auditor to identify systemic weaknesses in the information security management system.